Well, to unpack some of that for us and discuss the impact of the Huawei blacklist, I'm joined live from Boston by Elizabeth Woyke. She is a business and technology reporter and the author of the book, The Smartphone: Anatomy of an Industry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So what's your reaction to how all this is unfolding, especially now with Google's decision to pull Huawei's Android license?
Well, it does seem like a dramatic escalation of these trade tensions, which is why we saw the major indices, a lot of chipmaker stocks reacting, Alphabet stock also reacting to the news pre-market today and also throughout the day.
And does Google somewhat have some egg on its face now that there is this reprieve? And how likely are other companies to either follow suit or perhaps take advantage of what's happening?
Well, I think there has been there has been a lot of consumer confusion. What's different about this escalation is that we went from having these restrictions placed on, for instance, U.S. government agencies to American consumers. And so there was this whole spate of articles today, what this means for you if you own a Huawei phone. So I think what Google was reacting to was all this consumer confusion, consumer fear about, this incredibly important device changing without, without your own input as the owner and consumer, just being changed because of these trade tensions.
Now, there is that reprieve for existing U.S. customers that Huawei will keep providing its updates until August 19th. From a consumer perspective, what should people be expecting?
Well, it looks like, if you have a Huawei phone right now, and also for any phones that have already shipped from Huawei, that those will continue to essentially be have the type of support you would have expected. But for the next generation of Huawei phones, if these trade tensions don't get resolved, then those would certainly be in jeopardy in terms of whether they can have any of these Google apps that people expect on Android phones, whether they can be pre-installed, whether people would be able to get security updates, new features. So that would be things like Gmail, Google Maps, the Chrome browser, the Google Play App Store. And then it also, I think, certainly throws into jeopardy any update of the next version of Android, which is currently being called Android Q, which would be released later this year, as to whether people would get a timely update of that on their phones.
So being that this release coming up later on this year, we know that Huawei's biggest audience is in China, but it also has a sizable presence in Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa, of course. How prepared is Huawei to withstand the fallout?
Yeah, and I think this is really where the impact will be, again, if this doesn't get resolved in the next few months, because especially in Europe, and that is really where Huawei has found a lot of success outside China with its consumer gadgets. It seems to me that European consumers, for example, would turn to rivals such as Xiaomi or OnePlus, manufacturers who also make quality Android phones at a similar price point, if they're not able to get, these sort of iconic Android apps that you expect from a Huawei phone.
And the Trump administration did say basically they're giving this time so that companies can sort of adjust their strategies. But what's at stake here for companies in Huawei's supply chain?
Yeah, well, that's why we saw a bunch of chipmaker stocks react today. Huawei is such a big company. It's the second largest smartphone maker, and it's really it's one of the few smartphone makers that is growing. It's the fastest growing. It's the second largest. It's a really important company, and so we're seeing these sort of chain reactions, these ripples, and not just for American companies. We saw statements being issued from European chip makers today, also their own stocks being affected. So I think, yeah, there are certainly reverberations that are already being felt, and we're pretty much in the first few days of this news.
Now, one company that's been coming up is ZTE, because it's also a Chinese smartphone company. But how is the impact of these latest moves similar or different from what happened with ZTE?
Yeah, I think it's natural to draw a comparison between the two because ZTE was placed on the same Commerce Department list back in 2016. On the other hand, though, the thing that people really remember from that particular dispute was what happened in 2018 when ZTE was placed on a different list, one that is stricter, that is essentially an outright ban. And that was really what tanked ZTE's business and what sort of required the sort of Trump reprieve. And so, Huawei has not been placed on that stricter list yet. Essentially, Huawei's in the position of, these kind of case-by-case licenses and exemptions needing to be secured.
Right.
And so it is quite different in the sense that I think in both cases, President Trump is probably looking to be able to use Huawei as a bit of a bargaining chip in the trade dispute, which is sort of what was done with ZTE. But of course, even just in 2018, we were in a far different place in terms of the trade war than we are in now. There were trade tensions, I would say then. Clearly now this is a trade war, though.
All right. Thank you so much for your insights. Elizabeth Woyke there in Boston.